So, welcome everyone. I'm delighted that you have joined us for today's MTI Research Snaps webinar. My name is Dr. Hillary Nixon. I am the Deputy Executive Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University. I am also the Chair of the Transportation Research Board's Standing Committee on Women and Gender in Transportation, and a key interest of this committee is on diversifying the transportation workforce, a topic for today's webinar. MTI is a university transportation center funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation that leads 4 competitively selected multi-university consortia focused on improving the mobility of people and goods. MTI's mission is to increase mobility for all by improving the safety, efficiency, accessibility, and convenience of our nation's transportation system. We accomplish this through surface transportation research, technology transfer, education, and workforce development. In today's webinar, we explore a study that gives us baseline data on the status of the diversity of the U.S. transit workforce and identifies potential barriers and promising practices for diversifying that workforce. Our speakers today are Dr. Asha Weinstein-Agarwal, Dr. Evelyn Blumenberg, and Dr. Anastasia Lukaidou-Sideris. Dr. Agarwal is director of the MTI National Transportation Finance Center and professor of urban and regional planning at San Jose State University. Dr. Blumenberg is a professor of urban planning and director of the Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies in the Luskin School of Public Affairs at the University of California, Los Angeles. Finally, Dr. Lukaidou-Sideris is the interim dean of the Luskin School of Public Affairs and a distinguished professor of urban planning at UCLA. During today's webinar, if you have any questions for our presenters, you can submit them through the chat or the Q&A feature. We are recording this webinar and the link to view will be available shortly on our website and social media pages. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. Asha, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you very much, Hillary, for the introduction. I am delighted to be here with my colleagues to present the results of this study. And Alvarino, why don't you go on to the next slide? So we're going to take turns. I'll just start us off and then hand it over to Dr. Blumenberg. But I want to mention that this project, like most research, we were highly dependent on many generous professionals who shared their expertise and time. So that's what we have here. And next slide. So this was a project that APTA had approached the Mineta Transportation Institute and asked if we could do research that would focus on 2 things. First, to provide a baseline of data on the status of the racial and ethnic and gender diversity of the U.S. transit workforce, and to do this particularly using an analysis of data that transit operators submit to the FTA through Equal Employment Opportunity Law. And then adjacent to that, to also work on identifying what potential barriers may be and promising practices for diversifying the transit workforce. Next slide. So today, I'm going to now actually turn it over to Evie, who's going to talk about what we learned looking at that EEO data. And then Dr. Lukaidou-Sideris will follow up with some original survey findings about diversity practices in transit agencies. So Evie, all yours.
Thanks, Asha. So I'm going to, as Asha mentioned, I'm going to start the research part of the presentation by talking about our analysis of diversity through the lens of the EEO data. So you can see on this slide the EEO data requirements. So to meet federal EEO law, the Federal Transit Administration requires that employee demographic reports from transit operators that have 100 or more employees that receive significant federal funds. Operators need to submit an EEO program plan, so a large plan, and as part of that plan, it includes data on the race and sex of their transit-related workforce, and it's broken down by job classification or job type. Next slide. So the value of the EEO data, it allows us to do 2 different kinds of analysis. So the first is to do a national data analysis, which is the one that we have done in our research. And we have pretty good coverage because a lot of the large transit agencies are required to report. And then the second is to do longitudinal analysis. So the transit agencies are required to submit these reports every 4 years. So it is possible, certainly moving backwards and moving forwards, to try to track what is going on in terms of diversity along gender and racial lines. Okay, next slide. So specifically what we did is that we received, through a FOIA request, we received the EEO program plans from 2 cycles, so 2018 and 2020 and 2022. And of the 218 plans that we received, 152 of them contained usable workforce demographic data. And the next slide will explain why we didn't have data from the 218 agencies. So next slide, please. So we faced a number of sort of data quality challenges, and so that's what is listed on this slide, sort of in 3 different categories. So the first is missing data. So, you know, as part of what the transit agencies reported, the data may not have been disaggregated by job category, a job type. Data was missing for some job categories. In some instances, this sort of second category, inaccurate data. So data was submitted for a larger pool of workers, not just for the transit workforce, or the data were reported for multiple years instead of for a single year. They were submitted for wrong job categories, or perhaps just missing because employees were not required to self-report. And then finally, the third challenge, which was a substantial challenge for this research, is that most of the agencies, with just a few exceptions, reported their data in PDF format. So you could imagine we were assembling all of these data from scratch, from these PDF documents. As part of this, some of the reports, you know, the data were illegible, low resolution, small font. And some of the agencies reported their data as percentages rather than raw numbers. And for a national sort analysis, we needed to aggregate all the raw numbers in order to get this industry-wide perspective. So next slide. So what did we learn from this analysis? So this first graph focuses on the sex composition of the transit workforce. So blue is male and yellow is female. And you can see that the industry is disproportionately male. So that's the top bar that you see here. Of course, there's significant variation across the job categories. So at the 2 extremes, you can see that women are a large percentage of the workforce in the administrative support positions, and they're hardly present as skilled craft workers. Next slide, please. So this next slide, as you can see, focuses on the racial and ethnic composition of the workforce. A great majority of the workforce, just over 3/4 of the workforce, is white and Black. Relative to all transit workers, workers of color are underrepresented in some of the higher paid job classifications. So as officials and administrators and as professionals. Black workers are significantly overrepresented as service and maintenance workers. So if you're wondering, that's where the bus operators are located. And then Hispanic workers are overrepresented as technicians. Next slide, please. So this slide is a little complicated to understand, but again, it's my last slide on the EEO data. So it's not realistic to expect a transit agency to hire workers from a particular racial or ethnic group if their percentage in the transit agency service area is very low. So in the last component of the analysis that we do in this report, we compared the agency diversity data to those of the diversity in the metropolitan area in which the transit agency is located. So the key is at the bottom of the slide. Pink is overutilization, blue is around parity, and yellow is underutilization. And you can see that with the exception of Black women, women are underutilized across all of the job categories. Both Black men and Black women are overutilized relative to the metropolitan population. And then Hispanic and Asian workers are largely, there's some exceptions, but are largely underutilized in the transit agency sector workforce. So I'm going to turn things over to Anastasia now.
Yeah, thank you, Evie, and hello, everybody. In addition to this analysis of the equal employment opportunity data that is being collected by FTA, we also distributed a survey, and actually APTA distributed the survey. We prepared the survey with 15 questions, and APTA sent it to 544 HR directors in transit agencies that are from their APTA membership list. We received back 92 responses. These responses came from 68 public transit agencies. That's what this means, of course, is that some agencies had more than one response. We basically asked either the HR director or someone particularly knowledgeable. The director could have handed it over to more than one person, and that's why we received more than one response from some agencies. 27 of these 68 agencies were among the largest 50 transit agencies. And I mentioned there were 15 questions. Basically, the questions inquired about a variety of information, such as how do the agencies collect and use diversity data. We also asked their perceptions about the status of workforce diversity in their agency. We asked about their efforts towards diversity, about hurdles, barriers that they may encounter in improving their workforce diversity. And we also asked if they have any suggestions, recommendations for effective strategies. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you some of the responses. We don't have time to go over all the responses of the 15 questions. We found that about 50% of the agencies mentioned that their diversity has increased. 13 of them said it has increased a lot. 37 has increased a little. About 20 remained the same. What was quite surprising is that 30 did not know or did not answer. So we had pretty high numbers in those that said did not know or did not want to respond. Only one agency said that they had decreased a lot. Let's go to the next slide. So we have done one part of the work that we are not going to cover today was a very thorough literature review. And we identify from this literature review a number of strategies that agencies tend to use to promote diversity. So we articulated these strategies that you see on the left, and we asked our respondents to indicate the perceived helpfulness in promoting workforce diversity. And more staff support for DEI programs was the one that received most of the positive votes, as well as having a more diverse pool of applicants. But they also, a number of people felt, the majority actually felt that having expanded professional development opportunities for their current staff. A lot of people mentioned about the need for additional funding for DEI programs. We see less support about having staff completing undergraduate or graduate degree programs, and better data on diversity indicators, even though if you put all of these together, somewhat helpful and very helpful, all of these strategies received more than 50% of the responses saying that they are helpful or somewhat helpful. Let's go to the next slide. We also asked how they use, for what purposes do agencies use the diversity data? And not surprised here, the vast majority mentioned 82% that they collect this data for FDA reporting. And 81% also said that this data is helpful for assessing their goals and progress towards DEI. Some of them, about 3/4, said that they use it for promotion and retention purposes, 69% for informing their HR and executive staff, for staff training. The lowest numbers were to inform their board or community stakeholders or for recruitment. Okay, let's go to the next one. So these were some of what I mentioned, some of the findings of the survey. I want to now summarize briefly some of our recommendations. First of all, our team feels that it is a good time to engage in programs to improve diversity, because in general, we find transit agencies experiencing staffing shortages, especially after the pandemic. We also see a transit sector that is evolving. Maybe new skill sets are required. So I think it is a good time for agencies to start thinking how to improve their diversity, their workforce diversity. Having more staffing and resources is, of course, good, not surprisingly, and everybody mentioned that. But we also, a number of people felt, and we tend to agree, that they need to develop in-house expertise rather than constantly using consultants. This might be easier, of course, for larger agencies than smaller agencies. Context matters, but developing some in-house expertise is always a good thing. In terms of recruitment, designing marketing strategies that highlight the diverse careers that are available in transit, but also working with local high schools, trade schools, colleges that have minority students. In academia, we try to do this a lot because we similarly want to expand the diversity of our students. And it is always helpful to go to these different high schools as a way of enhancing the pool of applicants. And we mentioned about developing in-house talent. There are ongoing professional development opportunities for employees in every job category, and it is very helpful if agencies offer these development opportunities to their existing staff. That might include even job shadowing to let people learn about different job opportunities within the agency. Next. A second set of recommendations had to do with the collection of data, the equal employment opportunity data. As Evie mentioned, we had a lot of issues in terms of trying to clean the data. Some of the data were not even readable. So we feel that while this is an excellent tool for analysis, but implementation can and should be improved. For one, we think that agencies need to get some help and develop better tools for monitoring workforce data. This help could be monetary, but it could be also workshops about how to best collect this data. We also feel that more carefully auditing these plans and these data that is submitted is good, because we found quite a lot of these that were not usable. We feel that it is important that agencies should submit the data in a spreadsheet format. This is not required. And so most agencies submit it, as Evie mentioned, in a PDF. But we also asked, one of the questions was, how easy is it to submit it in a spreadsheet format? And the vast majority said it would be very easy. This spreadsheet format would allow much better analysis and comparison from researchers. And lastly, we were quite surprised to see that over 50%, in some cases up to 2/3 of the employees avoid self-reporting about themselves. And so, agencies need to encourage more employees to self-report, because if they don't self-report, we know nothing about, and the data that we may get may not be accurate. We feel that there needs to be a process for a regular review of industry-wide EEO data, and this could come from either the US DOT or from APTA, or perhaps another organization that advocates for diversity in the transit workforce. So in a nutshell, these have been our recommendations, and I think we would now open it for questions. Thank you very much.
So
go ahead.
I see
so I was going to.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Nope. Jump right in.
So I just see the question that is in the question and answer. So can I just start with that one, because it's
I was going to direct it to you.
EEO. So Michael, you're absolutely right. It could be the cutoffs were could be established in different areas in terms of under and over utilization and parity. There's no great way to do this. I guess in hindsight, it would have been nice to have sort of tested the robustness using different categories. And so, we could certainly do this. The reason we did set those thresholds for that analysis is because they were used in a previous study. So to go back to the slide that we had about longitudinal data, we were interested in also what Anastasia was mentioning in terms of our work on the literature review in this area, is that we were really interested in at least drawing on the literature to try to understand where things, if things had changed. So we used those thresholds because they'd been used in a previous study. And things haven't changed that much, but your point is well taken. We probably should have tried some different cutoffs.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Just reminding our audience members to know that you are welcome to submit questions using the Q&A or chat feature. But I do have a couple of questions that we'd submitted or been submitted earlier. And I always like this one because, and this can go out to any of you, but what surprised you most about your findings, having gone through this intensive research process? So.
We probably all have different ones, but I'll start first. I was initially so excited to have a chance to work with the EEO data because, it's comprehensive, many agencies. I was surprised at how few agencies relative to what we would expected had usable data. And by the way, I have no idea why that was. Did FTA not give us certain reports? But it was surprising to me. And actually, a number of transit agency staff I've spoken with have also been somewhat surprised.
So others, Anastasia, do you have?
Yeah, that was my I mentioned also that was my surprise as well, because it is such a great tool, and yet if the data is not collected in the right way and it cannot be used, then what's the point? But the second one that I mentioned also was the fact that 50 to 75% of the employees do not self-report their race, ethnicity, etc. And I'm not sure why exactly. And there may be different reasons, but it was surprising to me.
So you can tell you're talking to a bunch of researchers who are focused on the data side of things. And I'm going to say one thing about the data and then one thing overall. It was just forget about putting the reporting aside. It was just very difficult to assemble the data. So it makes it, hard to do this. And so we need to think about sort of easing the way that we collect data. So that's on the data side of things. And I had just mentioned in my previous response that our findings are generally similar. I mean, we looked at the data for more transit agencies than ever before through this process, and our findings are similar to previous analyses. And then if you look at our survey, those in the agencies seem to feel like things are getting better. And so it would be really interesting to have the, kind of the infrastructure, both on the data, but also, talking to doing more in depth with the transit agencies to try to bring those both together, sort of are things improving, what has been left, what's been really successful in sort of diversifying the transit agency workforce, those things. So, yeah.
Yeah. Asha, did you want to add in something there?
Yeah, I'll just add something that I had not expected, but we did a number of interviews sort of formally with people working in transit organizations and then more casual conversations. And I'm probably very naive, but I had somehow just assumed that, for every staff member, you have some kind of electronic record that has all kinds of information, including the person's demographics, and it would be fairly easy to pull these statistics. And I was told that no, in many cases, there's a paper file, and when someone's hired, they check this off, but then there is no easy way later to go back. And so some of the people who had explained this to me had suggested, and to me, this makes a lot of sense, that perhaps there can be an effort, again, coming from FTA or APTA, I don't know where, but to help agencies develop online and more modern ways of tracking, because it's going to be useful for far more than just doing these EEO data reports.
Yeah, very interesting. So we probably only have time for about one more question. I think it's one of the challenges with these really great, exciting research projects is we can't spend hours and hours in this particular environment talking into all the nitty gritty. But I think one of the things that probably isn't super surprising for those of us who work in workforce development is that your findings show a great majority of CEOs and senior leadership are white and male, and that women of color are underrepresented in these leadership positions. I guess it's kind of maybe a two-part question. Why is this, or what are some things that we could do to change this dynamic within our workforce?
I'll be super quick. One thing is focusing more on promoting within. Because there are many non-white employees at the more, service workers, technicians, and if agencies can really give them the tools to develop the skills so that they can rise to leadership roles, I think that's probably one of the most effective, not the only thing, but very effective.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, Anastasia or Eddie?
Yeah, I want to say that I think I fully agree. I mean, there are leadership seminars and workshops, and there needs to be some conscious effort from the part of the leadership of the transit agency to promote a diverse workforce in the managerial positions, because the numbers are pretty stark. But the other thing that I also was, I remember from one of the early interviews we did, was the fact that while the transit sector has changed significantly, especially because of technology, sometimes the job descriptions often don't change. And quite often, women in particular may be discouraged from applying where, internal combustion engines needed mechanics, they were mostly men. But now with, electronic technologies and a lot of women in STEM majors, we have many more women who are capable in some of these skilled jobs, and yet sometimes the job descriptions have not changed for the last 20, 25 years, and oftentimes women don't even apply. And I remember the person who was from an agency, a large agency that was making this point that, you know.
I know we're at the end of our time, but just one, so I agree with my colleagues. I think that, kind of a lack of, there is gender and racial discrimination in the workforce in general, including the transit workforce. And a lack of diversity can lead to a culture where it's difficult to move up to leadership positions. So that's one. And then just to draw on the comment that is in the Q&A, kind of the work that SFMTA is doing. Yeah, I think, like Asha said, I think we need pathways both internally and externally to diversify and then to promote to the highest level of leadership within the organization.
There we go. Thank you all. And Brett, just on your comment about career technical education, we actually have 2 additional projects underway that will be coming out shortly that focus on kind of an analysis evaluation of some apprenticeship and CTE programs. So keep an eye on that, and please make sure you're on our listserv. So I want to thank all of our speakers for joining us today. The final report is available on the MTI website if you want to take a deep dive into the report, and we've put that link in the chat. And then just as we're wrapping up, this September 5th, this Thursday at 5 p.m., we have a session to learn about our San Jose State University Master of Science in Transportation Management program, which is designed for working professionals. This program students participate through live online classes. It's an extremely affordable master's degree, costs about $15,000, maybe a little bit less, and there is opportunities for fellowships and some financial support. And if you would like to learn more about that program at an information session, we have put the link in the chat. So thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you at a future MTI Research Snaps webinar.